Morning, everyone. Welcome to this morning's devotional on this Friday, the end of another week. And we're going to be reading from 2 Samuel chapter 2. It says, "In the course of time, David inquired of the Lord, 'Shall I go up to one of the towns?' he asked. The Lord said, 'Go up.' David asked, 'Where shall I go?' 'To Hebron,' the Lord answered. So David went up there with his two wives, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. David also took the men who were with him, each with his family, and they settled in Hebron and its towns. Then the men of Judah came to Hebron, and there they anointed David king over the tribe of Judah." And so today I'd like to talk about something which I kind of given a bit of a title, which I haven't really for any of these devotionals, but the title would be this, Our Obvious Enemy. And I'm not saying that, it's kind of a play on words, I'm not saying that there is an obvious enemy that we should be fighting. Rather, I'm saying that sometimes obvious itself is the biggest enemy that we face. If we think about David, what's happened to now? He was living with the Philistines in a town called Keilah, and the Philistines fight against Saul. Saul dies. Now, what's the most obvious thing for David to do? Well, God's promised him that he's going to be the king of Israel, right? So the obvious thing is go to Jerusalem, be crowned king, right? We don't need to talk to God about this. This is the most obvious thing. But David's first thought is, I need to go home, and I need to go. So he goes to God and he says, "Lord, should I go back to one of the towns of Judah to go live there?" And God's like, "Yeah, you should go." And then he says, "Which town?" And God says, "The town of Hebron." And so David goes to Hebron, like God says. And when he gets to Hebron, it says that the men of Judah came, and there they anointed David king over the tribe of Judah. Not king over the tribe of Israel yet, just king over the tribe of Judah. And it's very easy for us, I think sometimes, friends, when God has promised us something, or we have a set of expertise in a particular area, or even we've just seen some stuff, we've got some wisdom, we've got some life experience. I know what to do. It's obvious right now. But sometimes obvious is the biggest enemy. It's in the areas of obvious where we can have our biggest failures, because it's in that moments that I don't think I need God. It's in those places where God has already spoken. I know exactly what to do in this place. And I kind of rush ahead of God and do whatever God's told me to do. If David had marched in, we'll see that Saul, one of Saul's sons, was actually ended up getting anointed king of Israel. So Judah and Israel were split for a bit. And then eventually that guy dies, and then David is anointed king of Israel. We'll get to that. If David marched into Jerusalem now and become the king, there would have been like the most massive war. And so David doesn't do that. He inquires of God, and God shows him the steps that it's going to take, little bit by little bit, for him to be able to become the king of Israel. And so here's the thing. We're going to be starting an Old Testament survey this Sunday afternoon at 4 o'clock. For those who are interested in, please don't feel a pressure to have to come be part of it. But I just thought it would be fun. There's a lot of guys who've asked me, how do I approach the Old Testament? How does it all fit together? What's the storyline like? Where do the prophets fit in Psalms and Proverbs and Job and all these different guys? Well, we're going to look at all of that and how it all fits together as a story, and hopefully have some real fun with that. But one of the things we see, and we'll talk about when we do the Old Testament survey, is the whole Old Testament is a picture pointing forward to the coming of Christ. That's the whole picture. Everything points forward. And so even the people that God chooses to highlight in the Old Testament are what are called types of Christ. And that doesn't mean like they are a type of Christ, like a kind of Christ. No, it just means they are pointing forward. Their lives are pointing forward to Christ coming. And David is one of these types, if you like, pointing forward to the fact that this incredible king, this leader king who comes with this different kind of leadership. Because in the Old Testament we see the law, and in the New Testament Jesus comes and fulfills that law and shows us a new way. Just like Saul was an old way of leading, and when David comes, Israel enters this new era of prosperity, and he brings this new kind of leadership. And in the way that David leads, he is so dependent on hearing God for every step. And he points forward to the way that Jesus is going to live. Because in John chapter 5, verse 19, Jesus says this, talking to his disciples, he says, "Truly I say to you, the Son can do nothing of his own accord, but only what he sees the Father doing. For whatever the Father does, that the Son does likewise." And friends, so David points forward to Jesus, and Jesus sets this pattern for our lives of, we think we know what to do all the time. It's funny how I go to God when I don't know what to do. But do I take the time to go to God when I know exactly what to do? Jesus was still God when he was walking around on this earth. He still knew all things. He was still incredibly powerful. Yet he still went. He said, I only do what my Father tells me to do, because there was this oneness between Jesus and his Father. And Jesus has called us into that same relationship, that father-son or father-daughter relationship with the Father, where we are able to live out the purposes of God in our day-to-day experience. And it doesn't matter if that's during COVID-19, that doesn't matter if that's during the Second World War, that doesn't matter if that's lying on a beach in Hawaii. God still has a plan that he calls for us to walk out. And sometimes in the moment, when things are so obvious and in front of us, that's when we can miss God the easiest. So can I encourage you, take some time, even if it seems really obvious as to what to do, take some time. God, what are you saying? Because it's in those little moments. I think it was Einstein or one of those really clever guys who said the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over, expecting a different result. And friends, I think if we always go back to the well of our own ideas, we always go back to the well of our own intellect or our own experience to try and find solutions to life's problems, we will always end up coming to the same issues eventually, even when we do try to find the solutions going forward. And that's when it's so helpful to be able to go to God and say, Lord, what do you want? And sometimes he'll show us and it'll be something completely different to what we were thinking. Other times it's completely in line. David said, shall I go to Judah? God says, go to Judah. Bang on, you got it, boy. Which town? Hebron. Okay, cool, go to Hebron. He goes to Hebron and there he is crowned king. He doesn't say to God, God, where do I go to get crowned king? He just says, where should I go next? And so can I encourage us, let's not allow obvious to become a real enemy. Let's be aware of obvious. Let's use our wisdom, use our experience, but in conjunction with what God is saying. Hope you guys have a wonderful, wonderful weekend and can't wait to hang with you on Sunday all together again.